Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on time, on point, and I am super excited to see you all. I can see there's already a good number of you in the room. We're going to have a fantastic session today, and it's actually an exciting moment. It's an exciting moment because this is the very first in what we hope is a series. We've called it the Summit Series, and it's really all about launch. Launch is, of course, the area of our industry which is never going to be deprioritized. I think that in the world of technology, in the world of increasing political tension, the importance that we're placing on our new medicines coming through is escalating. It's certainly not going anywhere. But of course, the number of constraints, the power that we have to affect the quality of a launch is also on the rise with really every day that passes. So today's session is, as you can see under the Summit series, is focused on launch leadership. This is a phrase which is probably not yet a buzzword, but we think that increasingly it will become so. And the reason for that, of course, is because we have the technology, we have the tools, and I'm pleased to say that insights are really not something which any company fails to grasp the importance of these days. But of course, it's whether or not we have the ability to act on those insights, whether we have the confidence with those insights, whether the technological side of things is giving us the confidence that we have to act on those insights. So my name's Paul Sims. I'm speaking to you from London, and I'm about to be joined by some fantastic panelists who I will introduce in just one second. Got around 350 of you signed up for today's session. It's a nice number. And what I want you to do is to be well aware that this is part one of two. I already said this is a series. It's a series of perhaps 6 webinars that we're hoping to do across the year. But this is also a pair, just to, keep you on your toes here. So this is part one of two, and part two is actually going to be on April 29. So just over a month from now, or just under a month from now, should I say. Please put a block in your calendar now. It's going to be for this sort of time, but we will, of course, be inviting to you that to you in due course. But just recognize that this is part one of two. And in this case, we're going to be very open-minded. We're going to be thinking about the what-ifs and the possibilities. In the second webinar, we're going to focus a little bit more on the practicalities and how to actually get there. So this is me. Hate this slide, but my team seems to think that it's necessary. There you go, that's me. And here are some wonderful people. Before I introduce them, why don't you introduce yourself? That's right. You can find the chat window, hopefully not too far. It's probably on the bottom or the top of your screen. And if you could possibly just drop in where you're dialing in from, your name, and maybe your job title and company, perhaps even why it is that you came to this webinar. What is it about launch? What is it that you're really interested to hear about? Because of course, unless we know, we may not cover that specific question that you have. So please do make sure you introduce yourself. And let me just get on with introducing others. So Alex, somebody who I have been fortunate to know both in his current role at Pfizer, where he's just come back from a major offsite meeting. Thank you, Alex, for being here. But also in his previous role at Sanofi, where he was a digital health pioneer. Nowadays, he is blending pharma, consumer health, digital to turn big ambition into real-world impact. And I have to say, Alex is someone who I've really seen throwing the gauntlet down of late and making sure that in medical affairs in particular, we have no place to hide. I think Alex recognizes the potential that medical can have on the company, but on the wider healthcare landscape, and is absolutely making sure that we get there. So thank you, Alex, for being here. Stacey, someone who I've got to know only recently, but very impressed. She is a scientist turned strategist, always the best kind of people in our industry, bringing precision medicine to thinking to medical excellence. And she actually has experience across academia as well as big pharma. And she is an expert in elevating teams and standards, converting complexity into clarity, which is certainly what we're going to be requiring on this. As you probably know, unless you've been living under a rock, AstraZeneca Oncology team is a very productive group of people these days with multiple launches coming up. And of course, no better person. Thank you, Stacey, for taking time out of a busy schedule to be here. Lance is someone that you will hopefully know from previous webinars and events that we have hosted. The reason is because he, of course, combines a technologist angle with launch leadership, and that is the flavor that we're looking for. Within3, I believe, are doing genuinely pioneering work in using artificial intelligence, but also regular intelligence to really rethink what launch could mean these days. And what I've been really appreciating is the open-minded approach to how launch teams can operate. So I'll be looking forward to hearing more with Lance very shortly. And Mark. Mark is a crowd favorite. He has recently changed roles. He's now at Grifols, doing some very important work there in business analytics, commercial excellence, and has actually been a source of truth for me on multiple dimensions of late. I've always found his counsel is genuinely valuable. He knows what's going on. He understands this insights world intimately and really knows how to turn analytics into action, which of course is what we're looking for in so many cases, particularly around leadership. Mark, an absolute pleasure that you are here with us. So you don't need to ask me. This session is being recorded and it will be sent to you afterwards, so don't worry about that. I will just issue the disclaimer. Everyone's speaking on their own personal capacity, not representing the views of their organization. And I have the results of the poll question that you answered when you signed up for today's webinar. You might remember that you did that when you registered. So here are the results, and you can see already there was one clear winner to question 1, which is when a new market signal challenges your launch plan, what typically happens next? Any ideas as to what that 50.8% is? Well, let's have a look. A cross-functional huddle decides. Teams adjust within weeks. Okay, so that's the sort of center of the normal distribution, I think, in terms of the others. Let's have a look at what else was there. Disgust for ownership is unclear. Next step tends to slip. That was a fifth of you. An eighth of you said a leader reacts, makes a decision. Teams adjust within days. So that would be the slightly more rapid and less consensus-driven approach. Debated until consensus, usually too late to matter. So that's the too slow approach. And then ignored completely, 5% of people saying that. Well, 2.3% logged for later. Interesting. Okay, so we are in the middle. We could be a little bit more decisive, perhaps. Question 2, where do your highest impact launch decisions most often slow down? Here we've got a slightly more even pie chart, as you can see. So with just over a quarter of the vote, we have the decision hierarchy is uncleared or disempowered. So choices go through loops. This is not very good news, is it? So there's unclear decision making. Perhaps that's the reason why we're doing today's webinar. The analytics insight generation verification is slow, nearly a fifth of you. And then already all of these ones, very similar numbers. Good enough evidence is disputed. Teams wait for total certainty. So real lack of belief there. Medical and commercial are misaligned, can't resolve direction quickly. And governance and review cycles add friction when speed is needed. So generally negative items there. And then finally, execution readiness limits action even when decisions are made. So you can't take the action even if you've gone to the decision. Okay, interesting, I think. Well, I would like to invite our panel to join. And as they do, I'm actually going to launch another poll. This one is a live one for you. Excuse me. Just trying to get my screen sorted out here. Too many things on my screen. Okay. Thank you, panel. I can see you are joining now. A new poll will arrive on your screen as I throw my slides down. Thank you. So you should see on your screen now something about leadership agility. You can see it's a two-part question. So have a go at those while we discuss, and we'll come back to the answers, close that poll in about 3-4 minutes from now. Okay, panel, thank you so much for bearing with me during my intro there. And I'd love to just hear whether or not there's any reaction to any of the poll questions that you've seen so far. And I'd also like to just understand from you where you think the core problem in being better launch leaders might be. Very, very high level, open-minded starting point. Don't want me to put words in your mouth. So any reaction and any sense of where you think the problem or the challenge might be right now. Who wants to go first on that?
I can start, Paul. I was surprised. Yeah, I was surprised by the 28% saying that there was an under decision hierarchy. In my experience, sometimes there's too much hierarchy. And it's almost, you have to go through many steps. So I'd be curious to hear my panelists if you find too much hierarchy, or are you with 28% that say the hierarchy is unclear?
Are they mutually exclusive, Stacey? Can you have too much hierarchy and unclear? Can you basically make decisions confidently but quickly, I guess, is the question. I mean, well, how is it? Do you feel, I mean, you guys have got so many launches going on that rapidity and agility must be utterly essential right now. Do you feel that there's a block?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I was thinking it as an either or choice. Maybe it is both. My gut reaction was that it is tends to be pretty hierarchical, but I suppose in some cases it could be, particularly getting into global versus US, present US medical, and obviously work closely with global colleagues. I could see case as well having some multiple cooks in the kitchen.
Indeed, indeed.
One of the things I think is interesting about that question is if you were to overlay those pie charts with the respondents, do you work in large pharma or biotech? And see what that breakout would be. So, our experience is large pharma is much more kind of what Stacey's describing because you're overlaying launch across multiple established divisions, organizations, regions, and trying to make those two things work together. Where a lot of times in small pharma, just because there's less people from an organizational perspective, which means kind of less entrenched silos, you get you can still get decision paralysis. Don't get me wrong, but it's usually not through multiple layers of hierarchy. It's usually more about um, lack of lack of clarity or confidence on what to do and when to do it. So I think that's I always think of these questions in that frame. Are we talking big pharma or small, first asset to market, second asset to market, biotech sort of thing?
And Lance, obviously, biotech is really designed for launch and little else. And therefore, is it the sort of malaise of more mature products that has defined the hierarchy or defined the divisions or silos in a bigger pharma company that then actually gets in the way of a good launch? And maybe would you be as so, you're somebody that does work across the pipeline. You don't just look at launch, right? So would you actually advocate that companies should set themselves up more appropriately for launch on a more permanent basis than in fact they are now?
I think there is absolutely a trend in large companies to try to integrate what were historically multiple separate divisions and silos closer together in a launch context. So, in a large company, because you have multiple therapies at multiple parts of the life cycle, you organize in divisions and groups, and people are trying to service all of those different things at once. The advantage of a small company, to your point, is this one asset may be the whole ballgame. And so the level of focus and sharing across division is quite different. And you also don't have years of historical inertia. So, what we see is companies that are really progressing, I'm talking large pharma, really progressing around launch, are trying to emulate some of the advantages that a smaller setup has. And some companies are doing that explicitly. They're kind of literally reorganizing in ways that are more integrated across traditional, division silos between commercial, medical, access, et cetera. And others do it on kind of a matrix or like a tiger team basis, where around certain launches, they'll bring together those groups kind of sitting above those hierarchies. In those cases, sometimes you can get some of the who actually is making the call, and how does that group relate back to the kind of the original command structure, if you will. But I guess a different way of saying it is companies that are not trying to integrate teams together are an increasing disadvantage, in my opinion, versus those who are actively trying to solve that problem. Launches work better when multiple organizations are working together through that life cycle versus each organization gets a plan, it's siloed, and they go off with their Gantt charts and start executing their part of the plan.
Excellent. Well, Lance, your cross client lens is going to be very useful a few times in this webinar, I feel. So we will come back to you. But Mark, Alex, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, maybe I'll make a few comments, Paul. I think the one thing that stood out to me when I was looking at those survey results is like we need to recognize that like choices we make in launch are very consequential. And there's this subtle difference between like what we might think is an early signal versus an insight that we're actually confident in deserves action. And, of course, this goes to a question of agility, but it also goes to a question of like, how can we be informed either by data sources, by expertise that we have inside, by the market research that's being done, by, whatever external opinion can guide us, because it's equally consequential if we act on a subtle signal that turns out not to be the most important thing, right? Because like when we get to the start line of launch, right, the new race that begins, right, we've been in multiple races till we've even got to that point. It's the beginning of a new race where we're about to let the world tell us what bits of our formula we got wrong and what bits we got right. And, we can always retrospectively look back and say, oh, yeah, we knew that right back then. But at the time, it's not necessarily so easy for teams to, sift through a whole lot of information that they're receiving and to work out which ones really matter. So I think I call that out because there's also sort of this interplay of subtle distinction and judgment that teams bring to the table, right? In those very consequential moments, which, I think we very much like flip modes, right? We imagining what we can create to now testing whether our assumptions are going to hold out as true when we're trying to shift healthcare. And that's a very rich environment to be in. It's also not a straightforward environment to be in. Let me word it this way. But Mark, I don't know if you want to, share perspective as well, let's say.
Yeah, and I love that, Alex, because what you're talking about is the separation of signal to noise. And, that's the goal when you're doing a launch or any type of commercialization effort is how do you separate the two?
Indeed. And Mark, have we lost Mark? Has Mark gone on pause there? I think we may have frozen Mark somehow. Hopefully he'll be back in just a second. I thought he'd finished his point. Oh, Mark, are you back? I'm afraid you're coming in and out.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on for the moment. What I want to do is to ask you guys, well, firstly, I'm going to close that poll, but only 2/3 of you have answered it. So you've got about 30 seconds before I close the poll. So please make sure you do that.
You got
and we've got Mark coming in drips and drabs. What I want to talk about is this idea of insight half-life. What Mark was saying was signal to noise ratio. And when you've got a lot of noise, it can be hard to know what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. And that must massively affect your kind of decision velocity, as it were. How do you guys manage this kind of insight half-life? With the polls, we saw that a lot of people said the action takes place too late. It's too slow. And as a result, the organizational malaise is not allowing us to either find that signal amongst the noise or to act decisively on it. So how do you guys manage that? I'm really interested to know what you can do to just, and even whether or not that is something you think about on a regular basis, trying to increase the speed of decisions around insights. Is that an active aim?
So maybe I'll begin, Paul, and then would love to hear from the other panelists, because I think that look, I think teams are like extremely busy in launch, right? I mean, like those teams are really under pressure. And like with some of the colleagues I work with, there's a catchphrase which is like, in the absence of data, you're always right. So I think there's this subtle like, if I think there might be something, how do I test it before I act? Now, smaller, more nimble companies, Lance, like single product companies, like might be more willing to test the boundaries and to push it, right? I mean, and you've got experience in that place. But like when we sit in companies that have like extensive capabilities where we can try and delve in and work out, is this something that we should act for? There's also benefit to discipline, right? So we've got this sort of like, we've got all these sort of like tension points that we need to navigate, right? About like, is it a signal? Is it noise? Should it be acted on? If it's a signal, how much time am I going to spend the discipline in working out if I'm confident that signal is the signal to act on versus the speed to act? And when I'm going to act, have I built in a measure at the end that's going to tell me, should I have acted? I think we talk about we talk about being able to learn from other industries on doing things like A/B testing and things like this. I don't know. I think it's hard in practice in healthcare at the moment. I think it's a great discipline, but I'm not sure it's a discipline we've mastered at scale. And I'd love to know if others have other experience of it. But all of this is pushing us, right? All of this is pushing us to be as centric to the stakeholders that we're serving to bring value to test our value propositions to understand the patient and their experience. Is it real? Is it not real? What are we missing? Like, it's such a rich environment, but there is this sort of like discipline, I think, that comes with signal, noise, verification, action. And that's something where I think we're all maturing, let's say, in our ability to keep pace in those sort of critical phases.
Alex, you seem to be suggesting, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing you wrongly here, but you seem to be suggesting that you welcome that chaos because it's a great test of our sort of character and ability, and you want some of that early noise, as it were, to hone, like training for a sports event almost. You want
I think so, Paul. And I don't know that speed to action is the measure of success. Like, I think, like, if we just reality check it for a second, right? Our companies have just spent billions of dollars developing a drug. You don't just like turn around and do something really strategic because of something that you're not absolutely confident in. Like, that's the paradigm challenge that we're dealing with, right? Like, if I had just done a incremental innovation that wasn't billions in the making and a decade in the making, I might be willing to do fairly rapid testing, right? But if I've spent all that effort to get to this critical juncture in market, and I know I'm going to learn from market, I know I haven't understood the market perfectly. When I get those signals, what am I going to do before I act? That's the paradigm I think our industry has to struggle with, right? And how quickly versus how robustly do we inform an assumed insight before we act? Now, we should all have hope and reason why those timelines are going to reduce and reduce and reduce as we build up great sophistication in internal data infrastructure, in partners that are helping us in the analytic space, in the richness of the ecosystem that's feeding back in real time at the moment, right? And so I think there's lots of opportunity. I'm just sort of bringing maybe a little bit of a contrary view of as attractive as it is to move fast, you don't want to move fast on something that's consequential and get it wrong. That's, I think, the tension point that we all face, especially in launch.
Well, Alex, I could speak with you for a couple of hours about agility and the way in which we make sure those decisions are both fast and correct. But Mark is back, fresh from a Zoom update, I understand, and always happens at the right time. Mark, you were just talking about signal to noise ratio and the importance of that, and obviously we didn't hear beyond that point, and you may have a reaction to what you were just hearing now. So
forgive me for the crash of Zoom in the middle of my most poetic statement ever in my life. So I'll try to dial it back here. But we were talking about signal and noise. And, the one thing with launches, you never have enough time. You just never have enough time. You start 3-4 years ahead of launch and you work up to that date. But the job is really, how do you start having this continuous learning? And that continuous learning is what separates signal from noise. If you start soon enough, you can pick up trends versus distractions. And I think this goes back to Alex's part. Like, how do you double down on what's right, but walk away from other things because you're already $1 billion into this? And that's the big challenge. It becomes personal. It becomes very hectic at the last minute. But really staying focused on that continuous learning agenda is so crucial to a successful launch. And that all, Paul, gets grounded in that patient journey, which starts the whole investment strategy to the development strategy. You have to go back to that patient journey often and double check your work to make sure you are bringing value to the market and at what time you can actually influence the market.
And Mark, we were talking about different sizes of companies earlier. You've just moved from a bigger company to a smaller, and obviously you're relatively young in your tenure. But I'm also interested to know whether or not it's easier or supposedly easier in a smaller setup.
It's same problems, different sizes. You know, when you move
Just
in a
take away or add a zero.
yeah,
Right.
when you move in a launch machine like my previous employer, where you're running 20, 30 assets at one time, getting ready to go out for launch, it's quite a chaotic time. But when you go into a smaller company, it becomes a focused. It doesn't mean things don't change. It goes back to the principles. How do you separate signal from noise? How do you get the integration of insights across medical, value, and access, and commercial, as well as third-party CI that all come together to really look at the asset holistically, the market holistically, the patient holistically, and understand where you can remove friction to actually find the patient and get them treated on therapy. So the game does not change at all. The strategies do not change. It's just more focused than what some of the bigger organizations are.
Well, you can see that I've posted the poll results that we were asking, and I think it comes right back to the exact topic of what we've just been talking about. And you can see the wisdom of the crowd, if you like, with the results there. The first result relatively even, with a third of people saying running a quick test and then committing with confidence, which is, to me, is pretty agile actually as things go. I expected a slightly more slower response than that. And then part two is a bit more polarized. Which evidence standard is most realistic? Evidence across sources is usually required. So you're looking for confirmations in different ways before taking action, perhaps speaking to Alex's point of, and Mark's point of being $1 billion in. Stacey, want to come back to you. Any thoughts on this, or indeed, can you move us towards perhaps solutions as the next chapter in our conversation here, and what you think is the way forward here that we need to be changing to get right, going on from here?
I have an idea that I'd like to share. It came up, you know, at least Lance and I know just came back from MAPS and Medical Affairs Professional Society. And in Insights Masterclass, this idea came up actually from me within 3, was talking about how the military uses an A1 data source or an A1 system, meaning that certain information could be classified as A1. It's reliable and it's credible. And so obviously they need to make decisions quite quickly, and they want to make those decisions on credible information, just as we do. So we started, could you implement an A1 like system in pharma? And I think you could. And so Alex, you're bringing up this discipline of, you know, signal to noise, being able to take your time to make the decisions that require the time. But on the other hand, when I look at the poll and 44% are saying evidence across sources is usually required, that's A1 data of, you know, A1, and I'm trying to remember from Tony here, you know, A-level data is the sources highly reliable, and 1 refers to, you know, the information is corroborated against multiple sources, versus say we could take social media, it's maybe, you know, C3 data, sometimes credible, sometimes reliable, sometimes not. And so I think what our audience is telling us is, you know, if the 44%, you're looking for a pretty high level of data, but if you get a decision quickly, if you're dealing with C3, oh, maybe this is some noise and we need to see, can we get better corroboration across sources, or can we get more reliable sources? It's a thought.
Yeah, and I'm curious as to how understood the rankings of insights are in comparison to a military system, actually, for each of you.
Yeah, I mean, Stacey captured, I think, the gist of that perfectly, which is you're trying to do a couple of things super quickly, right? You're trying to limit the time it takes to identify, is something signal or noise, and you're trying to understand, is it on a scale, how credible is this? This is absolutely certain versus this is not. And if it's not, are you dumping it, or is it because you have more investigation to do? And one of the things I think, and this is where kind of tools can overlap with this conversation, right, is if the idea is that there's some analyst or set of analysts having to then manually take days or weeks to either go inspect the market for more information, to validate this hypothesis or run some test or whatever, that takes time. And then if the idea is that some analyst also then has to kind of pull all that together to get that ready for a decision-making process of some sort, all that takes time. And but those are all things that tools can take that time as close to real time as you can in today's world versus where the world was 2 or 3 years ago. We endeavored to make tools like that, both to allow that super quick analysis of multiple sources, as well as to drive up the productivity of people using it. Like, we if you think about it in the example that Alex was talking about, if a, or Mark, if a signal popped up and it was realistically going to take you, say, 8 weeks to get to a resolution on whether or not that's something we should care about, versus you could know in an afternoon, how might that change from a leadership perspective, how you organize your decision-making processes? And so we try to identify places where there's a lot of gap in time and figure out how to shrink it down. And what's cool though is even ignoring the tools and tech parts, a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, if you're bringing some cross-functional expertise to these teams, it's easier to kind of cross-triangulate oftentimes, this signal, but there's also an access component, or the signal's here, but let's go ahead and look at the population side of this and see if we can correlate. So sometimes teams manage these multiple sources that Stacy's talking about kind of manually across the silos, sometimes in tooling. But I think her point is exactly right, that's how it should be thought through to address exactly what Alex is talking about.
And just sticking with you for a second longer, Lance, I'm curious as to whether you think the technology has progressed to such a level that we can be confident in this multi-tool or multi-triangulation, to use your word, point, and do the platforms that exist today actually allow that to be done with confidence? Because my guess is that they'd be great at validating an insight over here, but not quite as good over here. So maybe you can give us some reflection on that.
I would say not all the tools think that way. So a lot of the focus in terms of where the maturity is right now is people just trying to gather big data sets together and like run some sort of like GPT thing over it to get kind of summaries and insights. What's not, and if you're trying to do what Stacy's talking about manually, which is, oh, the signal suggests this, let's manually try to decide the confidence of it. That's a lot of work for somebody. And so, what we try to do and what we do is we have kind of a layer of governance AI whose job it is to try to understand confidence level in the stuff that we're pushing out, really to make that job easier. So some of these things are, as the tools mature and these things that cause this time become features in the tooling, that's going to be better over time. In the near term, depending on what you're using or what your IT or ops group has built, if you're in a larger company, you kind of have to build your processes and your checks around your view of the capabilities that you have and how confident you are in them. But it is absolutely a race to get rid of that sort of work and have AI that you can incredibly verify confidence, as opposed to it's saying this, but I don't really know. So let me go ask my analyst to go back and like chase this down over the next week to see if this is really true. That's where the industry is moving away from pretty quickly. We spend a lot of time on this issue. The it's signal to noise is a couple of things. It's obviously we hear something, should we care about it? It's also we think we're hearing something, are we really? So it's a little bit of kind of like what's the error rate on the inputs? Are we misunderstanding or misinterpreting what we're hearing before we even decide, no, we heard it right, doesn't matter. And so we try to look at that whole continuum to avoid those missteps that I think, Mark, you were talking about.
Yeah, I can appreciate the desire to get rid of that layer of work. As you said, it's a lot of hard work, but at the same time, we don't want people to be using consumer grade LLMs to make billion-dollar decisions, as was pointed out.
No, and I think it's not. If any of the tech that you're talking to, people are telling you like, oh yes, we've solved this, and like humans need not apply, they're kind of sort of lying to you. It's more just about there is someone who's going to have to make the decisions that Alex is talking about. How do you make that person as productive as possible and take the time it would take that person to become confident in that decision as quick as possible so they can do other things. Because validating is something, a signal or noise, is not necessarily putting more, more medicine in patients' hands. That's not where the value is, people spending time. So I think there's places, productivity against these things that used to take so much time because the tools didn't support it, is where I think there's a huge opportunity. And if you take that time away from launch teams and they can spend it on bigger, better things, um, that's where we all want to be.
And Lance, I think that you're
Okay,
bringing up
please.
a point of why you're seeing the evolution in insight roles within an organization, shifting away from the siloed individual insights to the integrated insights, moving towards decision sciences. You know, the separation, to your point, of signal and noise is very complex. But if you have the right team, the integrated insights team that's focused on separating it and shows into the meeting going, our confidence level is X, Y, and Z. And our outcome we would like to go after today is this, and walk through the body of evidence. It makes it a lot easier for that senior leader to make a decision because it's been quantified or explained prior to it. And I see the AZs of the world, the Novartis of the world, the Pfizers of the world have all started moving into this integrated approach. And it makes perfect sense, exactly to what you were talking about. We're not at a point for large language models to do that for us, but we are at a point where we can structure organizations, integrate and collaborate more, and be proactive on the insights front.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew Mooney in the chat has written, teams need to invest in scenario planning and triggers to reduce the need to react. Alex, you were talking earlier about allowing the noise in such that we can become better decision makers later. And I am a fan of something that Mike Rea says at Idea Pharma, which is he studied that the more different situations you put a molecule into back in phase 1 level, the typically more successful a drug is, because you have basically put it, you've seen where the drug may or may not perform well above and beyond what scientists know or predict. So I'm just curious from all of you, really, whether or not you see this new technological era that we're entering as one where you can pressure test more easily different situations and perhaps get rid of assumptions, but also validate wild assumptions or wild experiments that may result in positive signal that you wouldn't in a previous world be able to do. It'd just be too expensive. Curious as to whether that thinking is becoming adopted and whether we are being more open-minded as a result.
I mean, I'll share my view, right? Which is like, I think there's immense creative power in some of these new tools that are becoming available. We're just going to have to learn how to make them sort of, an ally extension of our sort of creativity in thinking differently, right? And what I sort of really mean by that is that, I think to some of the anecdotes that were made before, I don't think it's about like going to some of the tools that are now available and expecting a definitive answer. But if those tools can pressure test our thinking and can challenge our thinking and can help us realize that, oh, there could actually be 100 derivative explanations of that, and I've just opened my mind to a world of new possibilities, it's actually a form of value. I think it's come up in the chat that just having great, passionate team members who are acting to investigate these, signals before they become insights, or however we want to use the language of it, is powerful and is of value. So, I feel optimistic it's going to push us all in a creative direction if we choose to use these as virtual colleagues that are going to, enrich our open-minded thinking. And I'm also hopeful that they will play a role in sort of breaking down data silos that might stop us seeing all the sources of knowledge that we could benefit from. And I'll lastly say, we're all on a journey of learning how to make these things work. And every time we think we've made them work, the model changes and we have to relearn it again. But I think we're going to be in that mode for for a good period of time, and then eventually it will become business as normal. And I think it'll be a better future state of business as normal when we get there.
Yeah, so whether we want to experiment or not, the world will force it upon us. I've got another poll question up called Credibility and Proof in an AI Era. So please take a moment to read that and give your reply. I think it would obviously be great to hear the crowd's opinion on the exact topic, again, that we were just covering. I want to hear some more opinions on issues discussed of late, this kind of experimental ability that we might have, and as Alex says, allowing us to be more creative perhaps going forward, and obviously anything else in response to the credibility and proof conversation.
And
Stacey.
if I could actually have a question for the rest of the panel, if I could, Paul.
Okay,
I was having a debate yesterday with someone, company not to be named, and his view was that all of this stuff we're talking about doesn't make a difference. That pretty much the product profile is set early. You press the button, out it goes, and the idea that you're picking things up that are going to make a material difference along that general trajectory is, nice in theory, but not real world things. I'd love to hear. I'm summarizing that was kind of the attitude, right? So like 90% of the trajectory is set before you press the launch button, and all the things you guys are talking about is around the edges. The people on the panel agree with that assessment, or do you believe that
Lance, there's no point in
Yeah.
commercial and medical functions at all, because it's already all
or there's
set.
no point needing to make adjustments? Like you got it right or wrong, and the inertia will take care of itself. I'm curious, maybe even especially from you, Mark, on the commercial side. Do you buy that, or do you feel like these sorts of decisions along the way have material impact to performance?
It definitely lands. I mean, from my lens, you need to partner very hard when you're getting ready for launch. If you're a commercial team, what's your medical team doing 2-3 years to shape the market? What's your value and access doing to really get the dossier ready for someone to cover these medicines? What are you doing to really understand warehousing your patients? These are all questions we should be asking 2-3 years before launch. So when you get to day 0, you have done all your no regret moves. Your ATUs are telling you the market's prime. Your teams are all lined up, and you've got all your advisors telling you you're ready to go. That you have a certain confidence, and even to a point, if you do it right, you have a little bit of swagger at day 0. You're ready to go. But you have to be prepared to switch up your game plan on day 5 if it falls apart very quickly. And really good launch planning starts the 3 years before with the market shaping, but also on day 20, day 100, day 365, plan B, plan C, and plan D are all ready to go as well. So you have to look at it very holistically.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mark. Because I was just thinking, in medical in particular, an example where the team was able to establish a lot of the data foundations and identify a new patient, or niche, maybe a better way of saying it, patient population that could benefit. So it's not just pivot and like, oh, we're failing, we need to save it. In this case, it was a much happier story of, wow, oh yes, this entire opportunity, and so being able to pivot in a positive way. But if I may, I was also thinking, in response to Andrew's about investing, I was thinking of Cassie Kozyrkov. She used to be Google's chief decision scientist. She made a comment recently about language models are so powerful that we should be utilizing them to answer your most important questions. And so when I'm thinking about Andrew's of, scenario planning, is there an opportunity to do that? And Cassie, when she was talking about LLM, she goes, look at your ChatGPT or Claude, whatever you use, and what are your latest questions? I'll speak for myself. I had recently asked about, preschool snacks. If you're not asking important questions, you are not leveraging the tools for the strength that they provide. For like Lance is. But when I think about scenario planning, it does seem like that is the most important question to ask, and we should be leveraging those tools to do so. And I think I really Neil's comment later on about data and all that's great, but surely the most important capability is asking good questions. And so, similar to me, if I'm asking my LLM, it's probably not the best question to be utilizing that tool. Granted, it gave me some great ideas, but I still needed it to answer the launch scenario planning. And so that just came to my mind of, are we really leveraging? We can know that that requires a large investment in terms of dollars as much as it does in terms of just time and willingness.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stacey. I can see a couple of people want to respond to that directly, and you will have a chance, but have a look quickly at the poll results, which I've just closed for this one. 57% of people talking about a trusted human owner validating anything before any action. So very much in tune with what's been said here. And on the second part of the question, close win between well, what most undermines trust, and its conflicting sources with no agreed way to resolve, and perceived bias in what was collected or highlighted. And I think we could probably run an entire webinar on bias and trust when it comes to technology. Maybe we'll do webinar 3 on that. Stay tuned. Yeah, sorry, Alex, it looked like you were about to comment on what Stacey said. So let's hear from you and anyone else. And then I'm going to quickly read out some of the audience comments as well before we finish. So Alex.
Oh yeah, no, look, I mean, I think like in fierce agreement with all the comments that were made, and I think, you know, Lanticos, like we understand, right, that things like TPPs have been set far in advance, and we've got to a point where we've got a label, and you know, I think we need to not get distracted by the problems, like problems we can't solve. Like the label is the label, and there'll be teams working on the label, but of course, there's so much that you can do to understand where you're going to land in clinical practice, and I think there's this subtlety, right? And it goes, I think, even to the survey, Paul, that you just, you know, shared of like, how consequential is the decision that you're about to make? Because like, if you're rethinking strategy, if you're changing the value proposition, if you're altering your competitive positioning, if you're thinking of seeing a completely different specialty group, they're very significant and consequential. If you're being more responsive because you've started to understand that, you know, it's, I don't know, a graphic or a video on this web page or this, you know, piece of material that's getting more attention and is the piece to amplify and bring forward, our agility can be much higher. And so, you know, we need to run these different paces based on the, let's say, the consequences of some of those pivot points. But at the end, like I would just go back, Lance, to the provocation you brought, right? At the end of the day, like launch is a start, it's a new start line, it's a new race. And there's so much that teams impact, so much that teams impact. There's so much that the TPP impacts as well, by the way, but there's so much that teams impact. That's absolutely clear.
Absolutely. Guys, time is running fast, and I want to get to some of the audience questions, which I don't even normally have time to do, but we've got a few good ones, so I'm going to come to those, and then maybe a final question if we've got for you guys at the end as well. So Adam Fairfield says, do you see teams setting triggers if a strong signal hits, it alerts the team to action using your A1 data sources or other aggregated data to monitor the noise for those signals? Neil Copping says, I agree quality of data is an important factor in deciding if and what action needs to be taken, but surely that needs to be considered against what it's measuring. If it's high quality data on element that is less significant for launch success, that is very different to high quality data on element that is significant for insignificant, I guess that's better to say, for launch success. Florin asks, different teams and functions may sometimes interpret data differently depending on their goals and mid-launch execution focus. Can speakers comment on how medical can lead decision-making as a true partner rather than as a support function, which we often have to recognize happens? So a few there. I'll just do one more because, you know, you haven't heard enough questions all at once already. It's up to you which one you choose, obviously, to answer. I'm not expecting you to do all of them. This one's actually from LinkedIn. We have a separate room of people on LinkedIn viewing this. This is for Stacey. In the case of C3 data, what are the ethical issues for using the company data, using AI when it's a large funded product? The ethical issues specifically. Read into that whatever you wish. So anyone want to respond to any of those?
I'll respond to the very first one, which was around the alerting of signals. In today's world, you should go to bed, wake up in the morning, and if there's a signal, your tool should tell you. You shouldn't have to go hunt for it. Or you shouldn't have to wait for the report from my consulting firm to give me 4 weeks from now that maybe tells me there's something I ought to look at it. And so it kind of comes back to, it's not just that there is a big data warehouse with analytics on top, it's the productivity of the people doing the job. So across the launch team, there are people whose job it is to understand, are there new signals? And if so, how should we do all the things that Alex and Stacy were talking about earlier? And the tools we're using should be focused on making those people's jobs easier and more proactive. So, if you just have some sort of big search engine on top of a pile of data and you're kind of accepting people to kind of go in and hunt for what's in there and what it means, I don't know that you're going to get the type of results that Alex was talking about just now.
Good point. You would hope that people would recognize that by now, Lance, but you probably see otherwise in your day-to-day. If you can remember them, anyone else on any other questions?
So I'll grab the one on medical. I thought that was a really good point. Often in insights, individuals forget we interpret data differently based off of our roles and experience. So we can run big models. That's easy to do, but interpreting them to what they actually mean and inspire insights requires us to read the business together. And when you look at launch and you look at the complexity of the science, whether it's cell and gene or, RLT treatments that are out there, it's very complex science. Then you look at the complexity of the marketplace and all the competition and the speed that they're moving as well. And then you throw in things like most favored nations and all this complexity come together. It's now a time more than ever to read the business as one. So Lance and I could sit in a room and look at one data point and be completely on different ends of what it means. And Stacy could walk in and have a third opinion. But the three of us together could rise to a really good consensus, whether it's signal or noise. So I encourage everybody to really get together, medical, access, commercial, and read the business as soon as possible, always together as one team. That inspires the action and connectivity for a good outcome.
Mark, one of my favorite voices on leadership is General Stanley McChrystal, and one of his famous quotes, I think, is it takes a network to beat a network. And so I think that you're going to talk about all this complexity of a healthcare network, and that's just a US bias, but I can imagine globally it's much the same. Internally, you have to have your network as well. And so I couldn't agree more that I learned so much from cross-functional colleagues, and it enhances your own understanding. I may feel very strongly of how I interpret the data, but hearing my commercial colleague or market access or even patient services, they've brought up that's refined how I think. And so I think that only makes you stronger. And Paul, you brought up somebody asking about the ethical use of C3 data. And I'm not quite sure I have a good handle of what your questioner is thinking. But what first came to mind is we're talking about launch leadership. And one of the very first tenets of leadership is moral clarity and knowing where you're going and what is right. So I don't know all privacy and all the things that I'm suspecting are probably in this person's mind. But I think if you have a strong leadership of we're doing the best for patients and for people, and we want our employees to also behave that way. So I don't have a good answer of ethical use on C3 data other than to say, for those that are just joining, C3 being kind of it's maybe partially reliable and partially corroborated. To me, the goal then would be and to elevate it to a way that would help patients use the data in a way. That's not a great answer. So I welcome other people that
you did well, given the
technical.
limited information, ironically, the lack of context.
Others that have
the question was only at C3, let's be honest with you, Stacey. So yeah, so thank you. Yeah, and you tried to bring it up to a new one. We haven't got long left. As you may have seen in the chat window, there is a resources section. There's an entire white paper that has actually just being launched as we speak right now on this exact topic of launch leadership. So please make sure you download that. It's been crafted over many weeks and months by a smart team of people who've been looking into this for quite some time now. And of course, some of the polls that you've just seen were about what you want to see from webinar number 2. This is just the first of a 2-part series, but if there's anything else you want to see, just put it down in the chat window. We will capture it. My final question to our panel is this. Could you, in a sentence or two at most, describe the modern launch leader? If you had to almost write a dictionary definition of the future launch leader, with a perhaps emphasis there on the word future, because I want to hear how it might be different from a historical launch leader. We just heard from Stacey, having a strong leadership direction, knowing that purpose, that principle. So let's take that as something we should have, and perhaps that one remains eternal. But going forward, what does a new modern launch leader need to have? I would love your dictionary perfect definitions, and I realize I've given you 0 prep time on this. Dictionary perfect definitions before we finish.
Wait, maybe I'll kick it off, Paul. Just
oh, that was brave, Alex. I love it.
Look, leading through launch is being someone who is like extremely receptive to the noise that's coming back. And, you know, I think when we think about that in today's world, I think that is about like being very data driven, but never losing sight of patient centricity. Data and technology can actually bring us closer to the patient than we've ever been before. That's something we need to now work out how to do.
Okay.
I would build on that. I would say the modern launch leader, and kind of also builds on what Stacey was just saying, I think is someone who is an active learner and actively wants to surround him or herself with people in your organization to help learn the environment in which the launch is happening, versus maybe the old school, which is the launch is, you know, on the commercial side is the most senior marketer from the last asset that went well, who has a command and control structure that works for them, and now they're in charge. I think that'd be my answer. Yeah.
Very interesting, Lance. Obviously, technology allowing you to learn as well is implicit there too. Mark and Stacey, you have the final words. Stacey's been very gracious, and I think Mark has. Oh no, you're still there, Mark. Mark, come on, you're on the spot. You're on the spot. I thought for a second.
Yeah, Paul, and forgive me, Zoom is not working well in my environment, so apologies. You know, launch leader of the future. You know, there's a couple things they have to do is collaboration, super collaborative. Like, how are we pulling everybody together? Science, medical, access, government affairs, getting everybody in the same boat, rowing the same direction. That's a new muscle. Ruthlessly focused on the patients and the ability to apply technology to make decisions. And I think if you start looking at connecting those 3 things together, that's going to be the future of leadership in general, let alone a launch excellence lead.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Stacey.
I'll give my definition from the dictionary of medical excellence. The future launch leader is a scientist at heart, willing to experiment. They are creative and they're fun. We're doing fun things. We're bringing medicines to patients. It doesn't have to be all serious.
I love that, Stacey. And I often criticize our industry for actually only being scientific within R&D. It's a little bit of a contentious thing to say, because I think a lot of us live off experience. But scientists are naturally curious and experimental. And what you said there was also fun, which I really liked. I think that scientists do enjoy their experiments a lot, and really do try and bring that in. So what a wonderful way to close. Well, we are at the hour, guys. I don't want you to be late for your next meeting. You've obviously been very gracious in joining us for the past hour. Particular thanks, of course, go to our panel today, who have all been willing to give up their time, energy, and thoughts, and in my opinion, have really elevated my understanding of what leadership could mean as we go forward with our launches. And for that, I am super, super grateful. Do please, I'm going to hold this window open for a couple more minutes. Do please write in what you want to see. Anything is on the cards, so make sure you say what you selfishly want to hear next time. Make sure you download the resources, lots of links in the chat, and of course the resources box at the bottom. And once again, a massive thanks, Lance, Alex, Mark, Stacey. I have really enjoyed our conversation today and super grateful to you all. And I hope to see everyone again very soon. And if you want, there's even a QR code on. Oh, is there a QR code on the screen? I can't quite work it out. It's going up and down. But there should be a QR code on the screen if you want to access the next upcoming events. Thank you, everybody. Don't be late. I will see you very soon. Appreciate it.